Hello, it's Amanda here from Suddenly Autistic, and in this video I'm really keen to talk to you about the trauma coping strategies that I have realised that I use quite naturally in my day-to-day life, and where they are, I suppose, life-enhancing and beneficial, or at least not damaging for me on the very least, but usually they have some positive, they bring something positive as well. I wanted to make this video because lots of reasons really. What triggered it was something different, but I'll talk to that in a minute. But I wanted to make this video. I decided it was probably a valid thing to make a video about because I think coping strategies for trauma are generally thought of as you know, when we're traumatized, we might go and immediately think about people doing things that are self-destructing or life-limiting or maybe antisocial or otherwise undesirable as a judgment when we think about them. And I really wanted to share these things that I do naturally, not to inspire other people to do that. You do what you do. But I wanted to recognise in myself that some of the things that I've always done have been very good for me, and I wanted to honour that and acknowledge that in public, in this forum. So that's what I'm going to do. Before I do that, I really want to read out this definition of what is trauma from the interwebs, from Trauma Informed Care, from a website called Trauma Informed Care. I don't know whether they're good or not. I've just literally pulled it up by Googling what is trauma, because I felt it was good to have a definition of that. And basically they're saying that trauma is a pervasive problem. It results from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional and or spiritual well-being. So what that is saying is quite a lot, but what it's not saying is trauma is this event, that event or another event. It's basically anything that you encounter, any scenario or I suppose environment that you encounter that leads to feelings of emotional dysregulation, that or that feeling of existential dread, that life-threatening fear that this is going to be bad, and that those feelings then manifest into effects, behaviours or otherwise, or thoughts that affect your life functioning. So I want you to understand that as you're listening to this video, that as somebody who is neurodiverse, being traumatised and having these situations can be a very regular occurrence, feeling overwhelmed and triggered and upset and dysregulated. That also said, I wear my dysregulation well. When I say I wear it well, what I mean is what I say. People don't generally realise what's going on underneath me, and that's not because I don't want them to know. It's a feature of my personality. I don't express my discomfort in a particularly dysregulated, external dysregulated way. But that doesn't mean I don't have a dysregulated system and don't feel my discomfort and my trauma very strongly. So I'm a very convenient person to be around in terms of trauma because I won't inconvenience you while I'm being inconvenienced, if you know what I mean. And I do have to say that I do think the majority of that response and the way I manifest my trauma is personality driven rather than because I feel it's the right thing to do. I have no trouble with letting loose when I need to and when I want to. And again, that's not a judgment, that's just my reality. In these videos I talk about my reality because I'm not a therapist. I'm certainly not trauma-informed therapist. I'm just a person. I'm a scientist actually, and navigating life. I was also late diagnosed, so I spent the majority of my life not knowing my neurodiversity or not knowing how my brain was working and processing things, and that has brought its own challenges and required me to have coping strategies. So let's get on to the coping strategies. So my trauma coping strategies that I'm really proud of, and actually am proud of and that want to share, are these three: humour, cleaning and over-explaining. And I'll go to the over-explaining first because it's actually that one that triggered me to make this video. So I was scrolling through the groups that I'm part of online, and there was a post come up about over-explaining being a trauma response. You know, the person who's had trauma feels like they need to over-explain to protect themselves. You know, this kind of gist of the post. Now, when I saw that, I thought, yes, and I wanted to add to that, and over-explaining is common to people on the neurodiversity spectrum. Whether they've been traumatised or not is what I thought. But as I was typing out this response, feeling like I was adding some insight to the group, and you know, this was a great share, actually I had an aha moment, and it kind of like, it shifted something in me. And it's funny when having these moments, because I think you can know something. And again, I'd describe this as knowing it intellectually. I think you can know something intellectually without feeling it. And you can also feel something without knowing what it is. When the two come together, that's what I think of as an aha moment. And this is what happened to me. So as I was typing out that, you know, some people over-explain because of trauma and some people over-explain because of neurodiversity, it was like, okay. Neurodiverse people have trauma. I knew that already. I am one. I can vouch for that. But they're the same thing. It's like over-explaining is a trauma coping strategy of the neurodiverse, because we're traumatized a lot and misunderstood a lot. And therefore, it is pretty much coping with trauma, and we are trying to protect ourselves from existential threat by explaining in great detail so that people don't misunderstand us. So I didn't post my response that I was going to, and instead I put something else like, oh, this is very true, very relatable, or something more positive and general like that. But then I made this video, or I'm making this video. What I want to say is that over-explaining is something that I do as a trauma coping strategy, and on reflection, it's also part of my neurodiversity. It's almost like my neurodiversity or my neurobrain, whatever. I don't want to keep saying that. My autism has orientated itself towards this as a good solution for me. So I'll probably make that a bit easier by explaining it this way. I am autistic. I have always been autistic. I have up to now struggled with some social situations, and I have definitely experienced being misunderstood and misinterpreted, and that has at times led to me being treated in a way that's not appropriate, that's quite abusive, and that's literally as if I'm going to do something bad to them, so in a defensive way. So some of my behaviour and my natural tone, I do have quite an aggressive tone of voice sometimes, and believe it or not, that is not something that I am fostering in order to get on in the world. That's just me. It's my natural tone is quite aggressive. So as a consequence, if you think about me going out in the world as this, you know, aggressive sounding bolshy woman, people would come at me quite hard back to put me back in my box, and I'd be like, whoa, why are people treating me like that way? So it fueled this need for me to be quite clear with my communication and say, no, this is what I mean, this is what I want. But I still felt that people didn't understand me. So over-explaining, definitely part of my trauma communication style. However, I think it's worth noting that I would classify this as something that I'm naturally orientated towards. So when I'm looking at my trauma coping strategies, I have different categories for them. I categorize my strategies. As you might expect, being autistic, I might even put them in a spreadsheet, which I actually do, and then make a diagram of them. So I have different categories. I have adopted strategies. I have inherited strategies, which are different to adopted, because you can adopt a strategy from people or situations outside your gene pool, and you can also adopt a strategy without thinking about whether it's actually fitting you. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Inherited is more genetic, so it's in your genes to choose that. It's something that would exist potentially even if you were not brought up with your birth parents and brought up somewhere else. It's a trait that comes out of your DNA almost. I don't know how. Don't ask me how. It's just a category I thought of. And then the other one I have is orientation, which could bring in something like your personality, your unique personality, your character. I can't remember which of those is more stable, personality or character. I think, anyway, I'm not going to guess, but anyway, it could be down to that. And that's your orientation. So I believe my over-explaining that I'm demonstrating so well in this video is part of my natural orientation. And with that, it's made stronger by me being neurodiverse. Had I not been neurodiverse, I might be inclined towards explaining quite thoroughly what I mean, as in maybe going into teacher mode, but it wouldn't necessarily be as strong a trait as it is because of being neurodiverse. And that strength of trait is probably coming from the trauma. So I believe my over-explaining is inherently part of who I am, part of my personality, would have existed regardless, and is made a stronger coping strategy because of my neurodiversity and my trauma. I think this is a positive. Now, this is the next thing. I'm doing this video because I wanted to talk to you about my positive traits. So I think it's useful if I explain why I've measured this as a positive. For me, I think my over-explaining is a positive trait because it's enabled me an extended conversation and social interaction with people, and to then nut out and face the prejudices and the narrative that's going on in other people's minds. So I am naturally curious, which again I think is inherent to me. It's a personality. I'm a scientist, I'm curious, I like asking questions, I like receiving information. I don't tend to emotionally layer onto that information, so I don't judge it as good or bad. It's just neutral that way, and so that helps. But I think this over-explaining, coming back to that, is beneficial to me, like I said, because when I've noticed that people are inclined to judge me, or it feels like they're going to judge me, or that they actually are, or they're treating me in a way that I think is a little bit, they're misunderstanding where I'm coming from, the over-explaining is helpful in that regard. But not always. There are times when I do need to be mindful of that, and I need to pare back my explaining to suit the situation. And that's something that I'm still working on. But as a whole, the over-explaining or explaining thoroughly has been useful for me because it's enabled me to preempt some of the misunderstandings and misconceptions that might be out there about myself in a way that doesn't embarrass or that kind of saves the other person. And I know that that is also something that psychologists would go, red flag, red flag. It is if you're not aware of it, and I understand that, but it's about self-management, it's about self-advocacy. So over-explaining to me is part of me representing myself and my ideas and my value into the world in a thorough way, but also in a fairly direct and complete way. So that's the first one, and that's the one I'm owning. That's me. Neither of my parents are big over-explainers. They don't think the same way as me as far as I can see. So I think that's just inherently me, strengthened by my trauma and my neurodiversity. The next one, cleaning. This is a fun one. I do like this because, again, when you're scrolling through social media, when I'm scrolling through social media, it's not unusual for me to, in the ADHD group, see people post things like, I wish that instead of shutting down and eating biscuits, that I had, my trauma response was cleaning the house. And I sit there and think, I can eat biscuits and lie down, but I also do the cleaning. I do the cleaning, the trauma cleaning. So trauma cleaning, or cleaning as a way of processing my trauma as opposed to cleaning up after a trauma, is something that I do. Now this for me falls into an adopted category. What I mean by that is that I witnessed growing up, and this is adopted, but with my birth family, I witnessed growing up that my dad would often take a lot of his emotional energy out on the cleaning. So he wasn't inclined, or that's how it seemed to me. So he wasn't inclined to do the day-to-day cleaning, but he would do the thorough big jobs or nooks and crannies things, usually as a result of being a bit wound up about something. It was like, scrub this out, just polish things and whatever it was. that resonated with me. It's something that I still have. So what I mean by cleaning as a trauma coping strategy is when I have big emotions and big feelings, sometimes I find it helpful to do those deep cleaning tasks because there's a level of rhythm to them. They're low stakes in terms of like sorting out your drawers or throwing stuff away, taking things to the charity shop, polishing all the skirting boards, cleaning all the windows, those sort of things, the non-essential, not the day-to-day things. So the stakes are low. It involves physical movement, so it's an embodied activity, which I need because I tend to be very in my mind. So it's really good for me to get moving. It's a bit like when I used to work at a factory. So when I was at my uni degree, I would come home at I'd have the holidays, the uni holidays, and I'd work at one of the factories. And it's very repetitive. You need just enough mind on the task, but not enough that you can't think of other things or just go into some kind of meditative state, as long as your body was moving and doing the task. So that's me. Now, when I say that's an adopted strategy, I have picked it up as that could work, and something that I've tried and then found that I've liked by watching my dad, but I don't feel it's in my DNA necessarily, and I don't feel that it's got that much to do with my neurodiversity. I feel like it was just something that I saw and that I tried and that I liked. In terms of how it's healthy for me, or that is one of my healthy, enjoyable strategies, is it's always great when I'm in that headspace and I get a job done. Sometimes the cleaning I do in that headspace can literally benefit the rest of my life for several months to a year later when I've done some intense filing or sorted out the medical cabinet or something like that. I feel and I understand it, to be healthy because I don't need to do it. Now, I can't comment on why my dad did this or what the long term. I can comment on what I saw and what I thought, but I don't know because I haven't asked him. But it could have been, there are many places that these feelings could have a core origin of, but for me, that cleaning, like I said, is a function. It's a functional activity that suits my brain. It ticks all the boxes of movement, just enough, thinking, just enough, benefits quite high, performance anxiety very low because you don't need to do it. No one's expecting it. It doesn't have a deadline. That works. I know it's healthy because I can live in my house without those things done. I can function with chaos or a certain level of it, with piles of paperwork and things not filed and stuff everywhere. I don't prefer it, and it does start to get a little bit on top of me with when I've got activities everywhere, which I can be inclined to do, but it doesn't make me feel worse about myself, and it doesn't consume my brain that I have to get this done before I can do anything else. So that's my measure of a healthy coping strategy. Yes, I do this cleaning activity, intense cleaning, when I'm stressed sometimes and when I want to relieve that stress or process that stress. And I can choose other strategies. I can leave it. I can live with the chaos. So it doesn't own me, that process. The last one that I was going to talk about, this humour coping strategy, is one that I believe I've inherited and that's been strengthened through the process of observing it, observation. So a little bit of adoption, but also inherent to me. And that's from my mum and my mum's side of the family. Now, I witnessed my mum, and even recently when I was with her, seeing the funny side of most things, and I do that too. And this is why I think it's inherent to me, because it's not necessarily like mum and I have a very similar humour orientation, and we do tend to find similar things funny, and we also tend to make similar mistakes that then turn into amusing moments. And what I mean by that is I can quite frequently misread signs. I can read things into, say, number plates or landscapes or designs that aren't there. So I might see something a little bit rude or misread something that just sounds really, peculiar or funny, and have a bit of a giggle about it. It's just that innocent, almost a little bit childish, but also a little bit of wordplay. So it's not obvious, it's not slapstick humour, it's a little bit intellectual. It usually originates around a misunderstanding or a misperceiving of something. So my humour coping strategy to trauma is something that I think I've inherited from my mum, and I feel again it's healthy because it doesn't take away from, it's an and rather than an or. So it doesn't take away from me processing the trauma. An example of that would be, because humour can be quite an inappropriate coping strategy for trauma when something very bad has happened and when the situation is looking quite dire. It's often not a good time to start cracking jokes in a way to divert attention or to distract people from the task at hand, whatever it is. There are some tasks, situations and whatever that deserve the sobriety and the quiet attention of your whole being. They do not need the distraction or the silver lining, the shit show, if you like. I recognise that, and while there are times, and there have been times when I have had inappropriate giggles internally, mostly now as an adult, at times where it probably wasn't a good idea, generally speaking it is. So with that, I also want to see that humour can be something that, again, does red flag triggers to a therapist. And I would encourage therapists to understand humour as a communication and connection tool, and also a way that can enhance our trauma processing as much as it could, if used incorrectly, stop us processing things at all, silver lining the shit show, or minimising the harm. So I am not advocating for laughing everything off and pretending it wasn't a problem. I'm advocating for accepting the diabolical situation that you're in, or the thing that's happened, or the feelings that you have, and taking a deep breath and taking the next step. When you have to take the next step, it's motivating to find the fun in that. So I'm thinking of humour as a little bit of a fun, an opportunity, and a motivator to keep going, to keep your spirits up. We're not saying this isn't bad. We're saying it is bad, and look at us trying to get through it the best we can. So they are my three favourite trauma coping strategies, things that I use every day. And I have one from my mum, one from my dad that I've adapted to myself, and one through my neurodiversity. All three of them could be healthy or unhealthy, and I think that's the other point I wanted to make. It's not, I don't think it's helpful to judge a particular strategy, whatever it is, outright, just black and white it. I don't think that's useful, because any strategy to deal with and to help us cope with or go towards and manage our big feelings and our trauma response can be either healthy or unhealthy or neutral, depending on how we employ it or deploy it, and how aware we are of that strategy that we're using. I think that's the work that I've done, that I'm very proud of, that unpicking, unraveling, sitting with the feelings and working it on, working around it. But it is difficult. It is difficult. I'd also like to say before I finish that, as with any trauma coping strategy, in a moment of trauma, when we're feeling traumatized, that is not a good time to go, oh, why am I doing this? The likelihood is you don't even know you're doing what you're doing. You have no idea. You're on automatic pilot. Your brain is set to survive and fight, flight or freeze. And it's only going to be later, once you feel a level of safety and control again, that you're going to be able to reflect back. Whether you accurately can reflect back is also something that can be difficult for the individual on their own to do. It's not impossible, I don't believe, but it's often easier for people to do that reflecting when verbalising a scenario, retelling a story to a trusted person, such as a therapist or a partner or a family member or friend. And I must stress that it must be trusted. So I hope that's been somewhat helpful. It's been an interesting journey for myself to think about my positive traits, and I would say that all three of these play into my natural personality. They are strengthened by my neurodiversity, and they have an origin which I can see. I can clearly see where these things have come from, and I think that's it with life. All of the things, all of the behaviours and habits and traits we have come from somewhere. That we've chosen them from somewhere, and our natural orientation shouldn't be underestimated. I think those of us who've had trauma and probably who have had other difficulties and struggles in life can often feel like we're just our diagnosis and that's it. About those, what are we? But there's clear bits of golden nuggets in there. There's clear little bits of themes around that you are there. I am here. I chose these things because they made sense to me. They enhance my life and give me great joy and pleasure, and they do help me to turn some of the difficult things of everyday life, of being someone who's neurodiverse, whether I knew it or not, into a sometimes good enough life and sometimes excellent, fun, motivating experience. I hope you can spend some time thinking about the positive coping strategies you have, or even some of them that you've framed as totally negative. Maybe give them a bit of an opportunity to show you where they are giving you a benefit. And that's not to say that then it's like excusing them, letting them off the hook. If these behaviours are making you sicker, more distant, more unhappy, then of course that's not healthy for you. But there will be something in there, some reason why you've gravitated towards it, and maybe that will help you find a better balance. Thank you.